Hello and welcome to week one of Critical Thinking. My name is Jeff Morgan. I will be your instructor for this course. I am the person in the photograph on the far right. This was taken a few years back when I was visiting a community in Africa in Malawi, which was an amazing experience and more that I will share probably as the course continues. A little bit about myself. I grew up in Newmarket, just down the road from Barrie. In case you're curious, I'm the good looking one in this photograph, number 24, standing beside the coach. I had a great childhood growing up there in Newmarket, and after I graduated from university, I left and I was overseas and traveling the world for about 15 years, and I've been back now for, I want to say, 5 or 6. Um, this is a trip I took to Kenya where we built a school there. Ghana, uh, we built a school in the background there, and Nicaragua. And since coming home, I have now been married and I have 2 kids. This is a picture of myself and my daughter. I always think it's important to share a little bit about my background and where I'm coming from so you can have a good idea of who I am and who's teaching you this course. Most importantly, I love teaching and I love learning. I have benefited from a number of teachers throughout my educational career that have really instilled in me in a belief that I was able to accomplish more than I thought I could. And it is a privilege and an honor to be able to reciprocate that gift and pass it on to my students. So my commitment to you is that I am here as your teacher and I will be in your corner for whatever you need. So if you have any questions about any of the course material or you need any help or guidance, certainly zip me an email and let me know. And if I can't answer the question for you, I am sure we can find someone with all the great resources here at Georgian that can help you. So, chapter 1, week 1 of critical thinking. If you are following along with your textbook, which you should be if you've checked any of the announcements, it is very important to pick up the textbook because all of the content in the quizzes, in the midterm, in the exam are coming directly from the textbook. So students are often more successful that have a copy of the textbook and can follow along. They do have a new version this year, but if you have the previous year's version, they're very similar. I would just check the table of contents in the version you've picked up an older book and make sure that it corresponds with the table of contents in the new version. So the aim of this class is just to go over the basics of critical thinking, and so you can identify basically what critical thinking is, and then the barriers and maybe a little bit of the errors in thinking when it comes to becoming a very good critical thinker, which is so important for your career as a student and beyond as you proceed in your professional career. So today we are going to try to accomplish 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 learning outcomes. And once we have completed this lecture, I'm hoping you have a better understanding of what critical thinking is, the Milgram experiment, which I look forward to sharing with you, which is kind of cool, characteristics of a good critical thinker, critical thinking and self-development, and some of the barriers that prevent us from being very good critical thinkers. So that is the goal for today. I'm hoping by the time this session is done, you have a much better understanding of this material. So the Milgram experiment, I will show you a video of at some point during this lecture. Because I'm recording this, I'm not sure if I'll do it in the live WebEx session or I'll do it later in the recording. But just so you know, there's the link to the video if you miss it and you're watching this recording after the class or outside of the live session. So what is critical thinking? It is a collection of skills we use every day that are necessary for our full intellectual development. So what they're saying is that as we learn and progress through school, we really haven't reached our full intellectual development and our full kind of ability as thinkers until we develop these essential critical thinking skills. This is why this course is so vital, especially if you are heading into a career, which most of you are in the health field, because you will be using critical thinking skills every day, and the level of critical thinking skills will often dictate how effective you are in your role. So it's vitally, vitally important that you establish good critical thinking skills. Critical thinking, like logic, requires learning of how to think rather than simply what to think. So we all went through, at least the majority of us, a traditional educational system in which we started in kindergarten, we went through grade 1 and 2 and 3 and all the way to grade 12. And during that time, we were told what to think. 1 + 1 = 2. The capital of Canada, the capital city is Ottawa. These are all facts and things that we were told what to think. Meiosis and mitosis in science, the quadratic equation in math. We were told what to think. So this course is not about learning what to think. It is more of developing the skill sets of how to think effectively, which is more important today than ever before. We are inundated with thousands and thousands of messages every day on social media, on TV, on the radio, and we have to decipher what is valid information and what is information that may be inaccurate or trying to lead us down a path that may not be the right one. So logic is a crucial part of critical thinking. It requires good analytical skills. Logic is defined as the study of methods, principles used in distinguishing correct, so good arguments, from bad arguments or poor arguments. And good arguments are sound and they are founded in evidence, where bad arguments may be based on opinion. Good critical thinking requires applying rules of logic rather than just gathering evidence, evaluating it, and coming up with a plan of action. So this is where critical thinking and logic should impact your thinking and decisions rather than maybe going by someone's opinion. So opinion, by contrast, is just a belief based on personal feelings rather than facts. And we hear a lot of opinions every day, and a lot of arguments that are based solely on opinions rather than credible evidence or information. So someone might say to you, I heard this the other day, that everyone who drives a BMW is not necessarily someone with a high moral character. So in other words, everyone who drives a BMW is just after money and they're worried about status and being rich. And for me, that sounds more like an opinion rather than a sound argument based on evidence and facts. And we hear these every day. And I'm sure as I go through this lesson, you can think of a number of opinions that you've heard this week that weren't based in credible evidence. And this is what we need to distinguish against and between. What is a sound argument and what is an opinion? They're much different. So cognitive development and college students. This should be very interesting for you because you are college students. And William Perry got together in the early 1900s to the late 1900s in developing several stages of cognitive, or in other words, intellectual development of college students. And later, researchers simplified all of this research into 3 development stages. So each one of you is in one of these 3 stages: dualism, relativism, and commitment. Everyone you meet in society is also in one of these 3 stages in terms of cognitive development. So the first stage is dualism. And this stage is often common amongst freshmen or many sophomores. And what that means, because this is an American textbook, is freshmen and sophomores are in the first 2 years of college. So when you're starting out in your first 2 years of educational development, you often fall into this dualistic way of thinking. And dualistic thinkers seek knowledge outside themselves and look to authority figures. So what they do is they think, okay, well, the professor's standing up in front of the classroom, so they must know better because they're an authority figure. And so this is where they find all of their information. And when doing research, dualistic students often fall into this mistake, which is a confirmation bias. A confirmation bias is simply people who seek out information that supports their point of view. So a good example would be some people believe the world is flat. And I think they call them flat earthers, or I'm not sure of the name. But if you were someone who believed the earth was flat rather than round, you would spend all of your time reading articles and being part of social media groups that believed the world was flat. This is called a confirmation bias, because what you're doing is you're going out and you're finding information that supports your bias, and you are ignoring information that may contradict it, stating that the earth is round. So that is what a confirmation bias is. And most people who are in the dualistic stage of thinking only seek out information that is going to support what they already believe. Once you move into stage 2 of cognitive development, you are in a relativistic stage. And these thinkers, rather than accepting that some knowledge is ambiguous, meaning that there is no clear thinking, they reject the fact that there is a dualistic viewpoint, and they move to the opposite extreme, and they say that all truth is relative, or it's just an opinion. So instead of being dualistic, saying things are right or they're wrong, you say everything is relative, and it all depends on the circumstances and the situation. So a good example of that might be arranged marriage. Some people feel like arranged people should be in arranged marriages and that we shouldn't have the choice of who we marry, and that it's either black or white. Either you believe that all marriages should be arranged, or you believe that they shouldn't be. That's dualistic, black or white. Relativism comes in and says, well, it's all relative. So maybe if you're born in some cultures, it is right to be arranged marriage. And if you're born in other cultures, it's not right. That's a relativistic viewpoint, saying that it all depends on the circumstances. Then we move into the last stage, and this is the commitment stage. As students mature, they come to realize that not all thinking is equally valid. Not only can authority figures be mistaken, which they have been and they continue to be, but a certain level of uncertainty and ambiguity is unavoidable. There is not a clear answer to everything. Maybe there is not a right or wrong to every question. When students at this stage experience uncertainty, they are now able to make decisions and commit to a particular position on the basis of reason and best evidence. So what you might be able to do is say, listen, let's continue along the thread of arranged marriage. There might be evidence out there that people who have an arranged marriage have a happier and longer marriage. And they did this based on surveying 5 million people over a 25-year period. That's some pretty sound evidence. And you make your decision based on evidence rather than someone's opinion. So that is stage 3. Dualism, relativism, commitment. At the same time, as independent thinkers, they're open to challenges and are flexible enough to change their positions as new evidence becomes available. So what you're saying is, I believe today, based on the evidence that I have seen, that arranged marriage is the best way to go. But having said that, if you want to present me with evidence that clearly demonstrates that maybe falling in love, going on dates, and getting married in a more Western traditional way of getting married is better, hey, I'm open to it. And this is when you know you've arrived at the last stage, is that you form a commitment and a position on a certain topic, but you are flexible and open to looking at new evidence. Because how would we progress as a human species if we still believed what we thought was true even 10 years ago? Because knowledge is changing so quickly, you have to be open. And again, if you are going into the health field and you're considering something in healthcare, the research in medicine and best practice is always changing and evolving. So you have to be an independent thinker that is flexible and is able to change their position based on new evidence. What did people once believe? This is a great question. If you think back and you look in the history books, sometimes we think it is astonishing that people believed certain things, right? People used to believe that the world was flat. They used to believe that we had witches in our communities, and those witches need to be burned at the stakes, especially if the crops failed. It must have been a witch's fault. We believed not long ago that women shouldn't vote, they shouldn't drive, they don't have the same intellectual capacity as men. We've believed that maybe the best way to cure someone of a disease was bleeding. So you cut them open and you let them bleed the disease out. So we believed a lot of things that have changed and evolved. And so my question, which I always love asking and I think is so interesting, what is it that we believe today that in 10 years or 50 years or 100 years, people will look back at us and think, how crazy was it that people in 2021 believed this? It is so far from the truth, and they must have been so ignorant at that point. So this is what is interesting about being a good critical thinker, is you have to look around you at the world and say, what is it that we believe today? Like a flock of sheep that is completely untrue. And it is this question that really ignites all of human knowledge and growth. It is very important to continue to ask this question. What is it that we believe today that may not be true? And what is it that people once believed wholeheartedly that couldn't be further from the truth? So there are several characteristics of a good critical thinker. And what you can do as I go through this list is you can think mentally, okay, am I good at these things? Are these things that I would say I need to work on? Or am I pretty solid in this area? So the first one is just analytical skills, like your ability to analyze information, which is crucially important now because we are inundated with all sorts of information that is not valid. It is not true. So do you have the ability to analyze that information? Your ability to communicate and read, your research and inquiry skills, and your flexibility and your tolerance to ambiguity. And what tolerance to ambiguity means really is that you are open to living in a world where a lot of things are gray. They're ambiguous. There's not a clear answer. And you're okay with that. You're okay with not having to have the answer to every question, that some things may be beyond our scope of understanding, or we just might not have enough evidence to have a clear answer at this point. Open-minded skepticism essentially is your ability to be open-minded in one way and skeptical in another. So you're open-minded to new information, and you are skeptical also of that information, that you're going to do your own due diligence, that you're going to analyze and interpret and dig a little bit deeper to know if what you're being fed is the truth. And so method of doubt involves setting aside our preconceptions and adopting a default position of skepticism. So I believe that we should save the pandas. And the pandas, as you may know, in the world are becoming increasingly endangered and may at one point become extinct. And I believe that we should do whatever we can to help them. But if you want to try to convince me that maybe we shouldn't save the pandas, I'm open to that. And I will listen to your argument. Ray Descartes is the one that came up with the philosophy of method of doubt. Creative problem-solving skills is important for a good critical thinker, attentive mindfulness and curiosity, and the ability to collaborate using learning skills, right? Like we know that we all have weaknesses and there's areas that we do not know all the answers. And so being able to learn with one another is so important. So when I go back to this list here, I see creative problem solving skills at the very top. So we are now living in a society where being able to find an answer is not as important as it used to be, because we have all the information at the tips of our fingers. So it is not necessarily essential to memorize all this information and to have it ingrained in us so we can pull it up at any point. It is more important, or at least as equally important, to be a creative thinker, a thinker that thinks abstractly, a thinker that is a problem solver. And here's a perfect example. I don't know how many years ago the iPod and the MP3 players came out. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. Prior to that, we had CDs, and all music would be from a CD. So if you wanted to go to the gym or bring music in your car, you would bring a stack of CDs, and a really nice car might have a CD changer that could hold 6 CDs. And that was a great thing. And people invested all sorts of money into buying CD players that played numerous CDs. And then one day, someone came out with an MP3 player. And essentially, instead of having 6 CDs, you could have 1,000 CDs. And they've done very well since. And everything has gone from being on a CD to being digital. And that is a good example of being a creative problem solver, because someone said, okay, listen, I want to bring more than 6 CDs on my 5-hour car ride or to the gym or for a walk or wherever else. So they decided, okay, listen, let's come up with a way that people can carry music, thousands and thousands of songs, with them in their pocket. And so I would argue that being a creative thinker and be able to think outside of the box is vitally important. And if you become someone who's a creative problem solver, you'll do very well, because we need more and more people that can solve problems rather than just regurgitate information that everyone can find now with a quick internet search. Critical thinking is not just important about abstract thought, it is also about self-development in your whole development as a person. Self-examination is an important part of the process, meaning that you have to know how well you are at being a good critical thinker, right? You have to sit back and say, okay, listen, am I a bit closed-minded at some point? Am I more worried about being right than being accurate or correct? Do I get in discussions with people and I pride myself in not making mistakes and having the right answer, right? All of these are ways of stopping your progress as a good critical thinker, right? Good critical thinkers take charge of their lives. By contrast, poor critical thinkers allow themselves to be controlled by circumstances and often deal ineffectively with problems which can result in depression, anger, or emotional problems. Developing a rational life plan is an effective way to avoid these problems. If you become a better thinker, you will not only have an easier time in your career, but you also will with your relationships and your personal life, because you will be able to step back and analyze situations and problems and challenges in your life, which I promise you, you will have lots of them, from an effective and efficient way. Because you're saying, okay, here's a problem. Instead of reacting out of anger or rage or emotion or depression or sadness, I'm going to step back from that situation and I'm going to deal with it with a rational and effective way. So that's the other thing that's so important about good critical thinking skills, is that it helps us become essentially better people. A life is like a flight plan, and if you know how it works with flights, is that a flight may take off from London, England, and fly to New York City or Toronto, and they are adjusting all the way. It's not like they take off and they put it on autopilot and the pilot doesn't think about the path or what they're doing until they land the plane. They are making hundreds of decisions along the way and continually adjusting the altitude and the direction and all the rest of it. This is what life is like. Although you may have a plan and you want to start at point A and get to point B and you hope it's going to be a straight line, what life will teach you, if it hasn't already, is that it will not conform to the plan that you have. So you have to remain flexible, open to ambiguity, and effective problem solver, and realize that challenges will come, and that if you develop the right skills and abilities, that you will be able to deal with any problem that comes your way. So, other features of good critical thinkers include the ability to challenge social injustices, of course, because what you're doing is you're looking at the world and saying, okay, I live in a society. In our society, there are a number of social injustices, things that I do not agree with. Even though that this is the status quo and this is the way things are done, it is not right. And I'm going to stand up and I'm going to challenge these things. Right? A good example is, how is it that in such a rich country, we have 10,000 people in the greater Toronto area that are homeless? Somehow that doesn't seem right. And it is social injustice in which I'm going to challenge. And lots of people do. They spend time raising money for the homelessness, volunteering in shelters, and finding all sorts of ways to help people, right? That is standing up to a social injustice. They cultivate a high self-esteem, a proactive attitude, and they're often involved in the democratic process, meaning that they are engaged in changing the rules in which our society is governed, right? They might think, okay, it is wrong that we used to live in a society that was segregated, that certain people couldn't mix in classrooms, they couldn't share washrooms, they had to sit in separate places in restaurants, and this is wrong. So they stand up to the social injustice, they are proactive about it, and they change the democratic process, the laws in which all of those old ways of thinking were governed. So barriers to critical thinking, these are things that affect our ability to think rationally and critically. So narrow-mindedness is one, irrational arguments, all of these things prevent us from thinking critically. So this was in China, I don't know the year, but what was happening is, if you know anything about China, it is a communist country where the information is very controlled and people only have access to certain things. If you go to China and you try to pull up Google, it does not exist. If you try to pull up Facebook, it does not exist. If you pull up YouTube, it is not there because all the information is controlled by the government because they want people thinking and believing only certain things. And you can imagine that the gentleman standing in front of these tanks is standing up for social injustice. He's standing up in a democratic way, saying this is not right the way we are doing things. And this is a huge act of defiance. And it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a good critical thinker to say the way things are being run are not right, and I'm going to stand up and do something about it instead of sitting on the sidelines and distracting myself with all the ways that people distract themselves from becoming good critical thinkers. So there's a 3-tier model. The process used in critical thinking can be broken down into 3 tiers or levels: experience, interpretation, and analysis. So experience is the foundational level of critical thinking. It involves first-hand experience as well as empirical facts derived from sources. Interpretation involves trying to make sense of these experiences. So you go through the experience and then you try to interpret it. And then the third level is an analysis, which involves raising our level of critical thinking and critically analyzing our interpretations of the experience. So an example might be, I go for a job interview. That is the experience. And for some reason, I don't get the job. You know, they don't call me back, or they phone me back a week later and they say, thank you for coming in. We really enjoyed meeting you. Unfortunately, you were unsuccessful in getting the job. And that is the experience. And some people will leave it at that. And they'll say, okay, listen, I didn't get the job. I'm just going to move on to the next one. But if you're really going to interpret that experience, what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, I didn't get the job. And why is that? Maybe you ask the person. Maybe you go through the interview in your head. Maybe you look at your resume. And they say, well, it's, you lack some experience here, or you didn't come across to us in a strong way in this part of the interview. And then you interpret it. You say, okay, I didn't get the job, and it was because maybe I lack these certain skills. And then the third stage is the analysis. And that stage is you really dig deep and you think, okay, do I have the proper experience and skills? And take stock. And maybe you do, and maybe you don't. And then you improve from there. But you improve based on a thorough analysis. So you go through an experience, you interpret that experience, and then you have a certain level of analysis. The resistance is that most people have a resistance between the interpretation and the analysis, right? Especially if something goes wrong. They are resistant to really digging deep and analyzing maybe as another perspective, because you wanted the job, you thought you were good for the job, you didn't get it, and you really resist doing that deep analysis. And maybe it's about an experience you have with a job, maybe it's about someone that you run into that has a different point of view, right? There's a resistance there that you don't want to necessarily open up and adopt a different perspective. Here we are. None of us like to be wrong. And when we are challenged, we often exhibit that resistance I was talking to, which is defined as the use of immature defense mechanisms that are rigid, impulsive, and non-analytical. And really what that means is mature people have a self-esteem that is high enough to realize that sometimes you're wrong. And it's fine. It's fine that you might have shared a certain perspective with a number of people for a long time and you change your point of view based on new evidence. It's fine. But if you continue to be entrenched and you don't want to really open up and analyze your thoughts and what you're thinking, it does act as a barrier to becoming an effective critical thinker. So there's all sorts of types of resistance. And so these types of resistance, I'm not going to go through all of them in detail, but just know that you'll have to understand these for the upcoming quiz and the midterm. Because I'll ask you, for example, what does it mean when avoidance as a type of resistance? What does that mean? Or I might give you a definition and say, is this avoidance? Is it anger? Is it cliche? Or is it denial? You'll have to know that there's a number of different ways that people resist thinking critically and deeply about things, and what way are you using personally, or what do people use, right? There's all sorts. This is great. Distractions at the bottom. People use distractions all the time to avoid thinking about things they don't want to think about, right? Like, you don't want to think about the hard day you had, or a relationship that's not working, or maybe a loss that you might have gone through. So what do? You turn on the TV, you go shopping, or you play video games. You find some way to distract yourself from thinking deeply about something. You really don't want to open up to thinking deeply about things because it may be uncomfortable, right? So people use distractions all the time. Conformity is another one. You just believe what everyone else around you believe. You're like, oh, well, all my friends think this way and my family feels this way, so this is just the way I'm going to think too, right? It's lazy. It's lazy thinking because you're really not coming up with any answers for yourself. What you're doing is you're just, like the slide I showed earlier, you're like the sheep. You're just conforming to the way that everyone thinks around you. It's not always easy, but it's important to look at other perspectives, and it's important to really give them a chance, right? Really look into them and say, okay, have I been looking at the situation in the wrong way? And have I had an opinion my whole life that really wasn't founded in any evidence? Narrow-mindedness, absolutism is a perspective that sees the world as black and white. We talked about that. It's kind of like dualism, right? Fear of challenge involves a reluctance to stand up to others who believe something different. Like, there's the other piece that's so interesting. Some of us just believe a certain thing, or maybe we believe it and we don't say anything because it's so much work standing up to people and saying, listen, I do disagree. I don't think it should be this way. It's really difficult for people to do that, right? Like, if we think about the racial segregation that went on in Canada and around the world for so many years, a lot of it was because people were reluctant to stand up to other people. Like, it's not like everyone believed it and everyone felt that there should be segregation and that certain people of certain colors should have certain rights and other people shouldn't. But people were like, just so much work standing up to other people. So much work trying to convince people of something that is true, but maybe it's not what they believe. So a lot of it is maybe a fear of challenging people. So egocentrism is a perspective that sees the self as the center of things. And you know, this is like being around any 2-year-old. Their whole life revolves around what they think and what they feel in the moment. They don't spend a lot of time empathizing with other people's beliefs or needs or perspectives, right? Ethnocentrism is an uncritical and unjustified belief in the inherent superiority of one's own culture or group. And in a very easy example of this is, some people believe that if you're born in a certain culture, that your culture is more important or superior to other ones. And anthropocentrism is the belief that humans are the center or the most significant entity in the universe, right? And this is very apparent in a lot of our actions. You know, human beings often fall into this belief that we are at the top of the pyramid, we're top of the food chain, that everything on earth is here for our consumption, and therefore we can chop down forests, we can pollute the water, and we can use animals in any way we want to, because we are the center of the universe and everything around us is just here to serve, right? Is to serve human beings. And you can think about how dangerous this anthropocentrism has become, because human beings are destroying the ecosystem that supports us, right? Because of this belief. Why not chop down hectares of trees? We're more important than trees. Why not dump a bunch of pollution in the water? Because we're more important than water. Why not wipe out all the pandas and the zebras and the lions and the elephants? Because, listen, we're more important. We are the center of the universe, right? So you can see how these ways of thinking and these perspectives can be very dangerous to the way people act. And if you think this way, which we all might do in some ways, that we're narrow-minded and that we need to broaden our perspective. According to Buddhist teaching, mental hindrances like distractions keep us from clearly understanding. This is why mindfulness and meditation and yoga have become so popular in our society, in Western society, over the last couple decades, because people have realized that we live in a society that is full of constant distractions. And if all we're ever doing is reacting to stimulus and information that is coming our way, that we never really get to a place where we can think deeply. So mindfulness and Buddhism and yoga are all teaching us to step back from the constant distraction, the constant information, and the constant noise, and really center ourselves in thinking about who we are, and in developing compassion and empathy. And what's amazing about this is that through meditation and mindfulness, you can actually grow the parts of your brain that are responsible for empathy and compassion and thinking deeper. It's like going to the gym. It's like working out. It's like running 5 miles a day. Your heart's going to get stronger. Your lungs are going to grow in capacity. It is the same thing with your brain. You can shape and grow and change the way you think, which is unbelievable when you kind of step back and think about how incredible that is. Rationalism and doublethink. We are faced with difficult choices or decisions. We often engage in rationalism to justify our decisions made on the basis of personal opinion. Because rationalization involves ignoring competing claims, people who engage in this are often caught up in doublethink. It is defined as holding two contradictory views or double standards at the same time and believing both to be true, right? So that's like, I believe in saving the environment, and that we are, we're polluting, we're killing animals, we're wrecking the water, we're polluting the air, but then my actions, all of them, run contrary to this belief, right? Like that's a double think situation where you're like, I'm really aware of all this thing, but I also believe that I'm entitled to drive a big SUV and fly around the world and like consume tons of plastics and all the ways that we know we're damaging the environment, right? That's a really good example of doublethink and how you rationalize that behavior, right? We're most likely to modify or critically analyze our views when we encounter cognitive or social distances, which occurs when we encounter new ideas or social behavior that contradicts or conflicts our worldviews. Evidence suggests that when people change their behavior, changes in their beliefs follow. So, I don't know. A good example of this might be you run into, maybe a vegetarian. And a vegetarian introduces you to a bunch of meals that don't have meat. But you've believed your whole life that it's so important to eat red meat because you need the protein, or somehow in your culture it's very important. And you decide to, okay, I'm going to have a couple of meals that are vegetarian every week. And your behavior begins to change because now you're open to the idea like maybe I don't have to have a piece of meat every time I eat. And it creates a cognitive dissonance or a social dissonance where your new behavior runs contrary to what you've always believed, that you have to have meat on your plate for every meal, every day. So conclusions, as explored in previous slides, effective critical thinkers require development of a collection of skills, including attentiveness, open-mindedness, strong communication, effective analytical research, and problem-solving skills. Critical thinkers also need to be aware of the barriers to effective critical thinking, such as habitual use of resistance and types of narrow-mindedness. So that is it. That is the information you need to know for this week. I would encourage you to read chapter 1 because it'll be in more depth there. And if you have any questions about any of this information, please do not hesitate to reach out and ask.